Okay, so planes of light for the next stage. The planes of light stage, we begin by placing the planes that we see in the lightest areas of the lights. Well, our paper is white, we're drawing with graphite, we can't really smack an even lighter tone on top of the paper white. It's basically a face that is mostly for painting. One could argue that we could, lift out some planes in the areas of the big form modeling that have been toned down a little bit. Perhaps something like a reflection on the calf here, the sort of highlight that is forming. Perhaps that could be put in at this stage. So yeah, why not? So there's just only a couple of these. Basically, we can just slightly lighten perhaps this heel area as well. I can see something like these are sort of specular highlights that I'm picking out here. They're not really like the center light of any area. Suppose there's a little bit of a highlight on the back of the thigh here as well, but it's already so light we can't really see what's going on there. Let's just take a peek on the other areas. So there's a little bit of a highlight also here on the ulna. Perhaps a little bit of something over here on the elbow on the right side as well. But we haven't added the dark planes yet, so it doesn't really look like much. Now that I started putting these things in, actually there's quite a few lighter planes we can pull out, so that's great. But yeah, we should really pay attention to the big form modeling when we're doing this, so we don't just, go to this lower foot, sorry, the left foot over here and just start pulling out insanely bright highlights. We need to be careful so we don't sort of destroy all the work we put in earlier. So yeah, as I was saying, maybe there's a little bit of a highlight here on the scapula, but it's already so bright, it's not really registering. So we need to put in that darker information to define that plane. All right, so first we put in the lightest planes in the light areas. After that, we do the darker planes in the dark areas of the big form modeling. So this all happens in the light areas. And this process is sort of built to ensure that we enhance the big form modeling rather than destroy it. The third and final thing will be to put in all these darker planes in the light areas, where we want to underplay these tones so that we can sort of keep the big form modeling in mind. All right. So perhaps we can start with these smaller foot planes actually, and for these I'll just pick out the HB pencil. So I won't be doing these ones with a tool because it's just not precise enough, honestly. That's what I'm saying while I'm not being very precise at all with this pencil either, but I'm just trying to sort of mark out where the little toe is happening there. It's anyway so microscopic that we don't really plan to bother to spend a lot of time working on this. We just want it to be sort of reminiscent of something believable. Okay, it's like it's pretty redundant when you probably can't even see what I'm doing. But basically there's this end of the bone of the metatarsal here, and from there just the pinky toe toe number 5 begins and ends around there. So it's really not a very easy angle to describe from this view, so let's just leave it at a suggestion like that. right? So in this right foot here, there's this mass of the muscles of the medial side of the foot that sort of create a dark half tone over here. There's also the navicular bone that is around here that is creating a bit of an eminence as well. Perhaps there's a little bit of a lighter area, as there is a little bit of a curvature to the foot, of course, the inside being, you know, slightly curved to the right on the right foot, so there's a little bit of a lighter tone in here rather than in the middle, so just sort of make that note over there. Perhaps we can again hop onto the shadow a little bit and markate that shadow a little bit more, so we can tell apart that these are dark halftones actually. So there is a little bit of shadow here, but it sort of turns into that darker halftone. Now, why do we need to make this distinction? It doesn't really make a big difference. We can just pretty much leave it like that. And then there's the sort of a side plane of the heel there. So normally one would indicate these just with a simple sort of shape of the brush or the stump, but since we're working so small, also in the dark areas, that the stump can't really do it, and also the brush isn't too accurate enough. That's why I'm working with this. Now let's extend the Achilles tendon a little bit, since here we have a little bit of a indication for its shadow already, which I've lost a little bit, so let's always just go back and reinforce a little bit, but then we can just sort of turn it into a halftone, and that's way too dark for what we have there. This is what I mean by not making things too obvious. Maybe this was the wrong tool actually. I should have just gone for the paper stump in order to avoid this, but hey, doesn't really matter. We can just lightly hatch everything back. This is where dot picking experience really comes in. You can just very quickly sort of get some kind of even tone back in there. Because yeah, tends to be that erasing leaves a bit of a mess, you know. It has a lot of these wider spots, and then there's darker spots and all this kind of stuff. So this was maybe continuing from the, you know, the darker side of the big form modeling. That's why I put it in now. Any other planes continuing from that kind of area? Perhaps the similar situation here on the right foot. We can indicate that the Achilles tendon sort of wants to continue that way, but it's obviously turning into the light as a darker halftone in there. We're not going to actually continue it all the way through because, well, this is already an exception, so we don't just put it in there. We follow the process. So also this, perhaps we pulled it a little bit too far. Maybe we can just limit the effect a little bit, or rather too far with too much tone, so that wasn't intentional. Just picking out something that distracts me a little bit. Also this indication of the end of the fibula over there is also a little bit distracting because it was just so dark, so outliney. But we'll probably darken that a little bit when we're rendering, so it sort of distinguishes itself from the rest of the foot a little bit, maybe. So continuing still with the HB pencil, let's do some of the planes of the hand. I have to adjust the image a little bit since I do want to see what I'm actually gonna put in. So there's a little bit of this halftone here, kind of separating from the knuckles onward. There's a little kind of halftone shape over here that sort of, in our image, I guess, could be also shadow. Again, I'm honestly not too interested in these areas like the hand and the foot in this case, because they're so small, you know, it's more about indicating rather than describing. So all right, well, there's a little bit of a side plane to the knuckle over here as well, but yeah, mostly we just wanna probably leave this hand in its entirety to the rendering phase, unless there's something very obvious. Then there's the head of the ulna, which is the distal head, that is. There's a pretty good bony landmark on there, on the wrist. So yeah, that's more or less all right with me. Perhaps we can slightly extend it downwards. It's legible, that's enough. So remember, still working within the darker planes in the darker areas of the big form modeling. So I don't think we have too many left anymore. They're, you know, very clearly part of that sort of group. Now that I'm looking at it, maybe I could actually just slightly push this shadow as well, just sort of paying attention to smaller details when I zoom in. I shouldn't do that unless I'm looking for something specific. So, you know, you don't have zoom in the model room, but you can walk a little bit forward usually to check something if you want. Just reinforce that outline a little bit. All right, well, it doesn't really matter how we, you know, define these things. Perhaps we could start off with this knee, the back of the knee sort of having this crease of the fat pad here. Let's just go ahead and try to indicate that. As you can see, maybe I'm not creating enough of a tone with this paper stump. So I'll just pick out the brush and start sort of working at that a little bit. Now that we're working in the exceptions, which is sort of the final stage of this planes of light stage, we want to indicate these planes in the lighter areas in such a manner that we can get, you know, enough contrast, but we want to downplay them as much as we can. As dark things in the middle of the lighter areas of the big form modeling sort of work against the whole illusion of form. We want to keep those things light. So with this, we can see it actually happening in this this side of the leg, or the knee rather, that this plane on the right side is actually a lot lighter. And these look pretty horrid, you know, like straight lines, but we'll refine those a little bit more once we get to the rendering of them. It's more about now it's more about the placement of those planes, I want to say. So let's just bring this a little bit further down. So the part in the middle is sort of fat pad, and on the sides it's a combination of bones and tendons, basically connecting from the back of the thigh into the bony parts of the tibia and fibula. Right, well, since we're working with the exceptions, might as well bring these Achilles tendon planes to a close. Just want to sort of lightly indicate that they are there. That is plenty enough. I don't want to have this super dark line going, you know, over this this foot area. It's actually deep enough where it actually casts a shadow onto itself, this Achilles tendon. But you know, I don't think that's doing us any favors in terms of describing the form of the leg, so let's just leave it like that. We prefer it this way, and we're the artists, so we can describe it how we want. Okay, let's just indicate those in there. Looking at the lower limbs as a whole, is there anything else I could put in at this stage? Not much, honestly, unless we start like really toning in this area for more anatomical accuracy. But I think I already went a little bit too dark with that, so let's just bring it back a little bit. And perhaps we can just indicate a little bit of this difference in the tones where the creases underneath the glutes lie. All right. Well, probably the part that everyone's been waiting for now. We finally get to put this in. So that we will finally get something more like the model. Just trying to look at it, see that it's positioned more or less correctly, you know, comparing things visually. Well, this, perhaps this crease could be a little bit more sort of vertical. Perhaps I'm being a little bit nitpicky here. So I could just make it a little bit darker in this area as well. We're trying to keep things sort of as light as necessary, or only as dark as is necessary to describe things, but that doesn't mean we should be afraid to darken things, because also it doesn't make a whole lot of sense if we just have that crease sort of appear very light from a very dark line, you know, because it's one sort of continuing shape in there. All right. I think that line ends about where it should be ending. Then have a little bit of an indication of the sacrum. And in this stage, don't be afraid to sort of redo and retry things. I feel like I pushed that middle line a little bit too much to the right side. So I'm just putting this plane back in. Also coming closer to having it too dark in places as well. Might actually want to just lighten it a little bit here in the center. We're getting pretty nitpicky here, but we'll be rendering this soon enough, so we can refine things then. So maybe we can actually darken this entire area a little bit. You can sort of see a plane happening there. Should sort of emphasize the form a little bit. We don't want to go crazy, obviously, but I think already this made a little bit of a difference in terms of, you know, the form reading better. And put it here as well a little bit. And also this bottom plane can come a little darker. And as we darken these things, perhaps we can just nudge this big form modeling on the side a little bit darker as well. So we get a little bit more three-dimensionality here. All right. And this line here actually just sort of describes a little bit of the glute as well. So it's sort of a top plane kind of dividing line. Again, we're now approaching slightly the right side of the big form modeling, which is lighter, but we can use a little bit more tone there as well. Also, this line is way too dark. It's a quite subtle line actually. Also, I'm talking about lines when I should be talking about planes. If they were lines, I would be making them with my pointy stick over here. All right, let's continue up the torso, find the kind of crease that forms between the torso and the pelvis area. Just indicate that lightly. This is also on the darker side of the big form modeling. All right, it's in a kind of light place. We could have sort of done these in the first stage as well, or the dark planes of in the dark areas of the big form modeling. Perhaps we don't want to overplay these creases too much, because these don't, well, the middle crease we can sort of ignore. It doesn't really play much of an anatomical role. This one sort of describes the pinching point when the torso tilts like this, because we have two masses of bone sort of interacting. This tilts like this tilts like this. Naturally, there's going to be a pinch point over there that sort of forms a crease. And this over here is not a crease at all. It's just the scapula creating that sort of lighter half tone over there. So, you know, knowing this stuff, maybe we can just ignore the middle part and put these two in there. Speaking of the scapula, there's darker planes on the edges. We can push this a little bit darker. It emphasizes the modeling again because it's on the edge of the form. Making that darker usually doesn't really bother us at all. Instead, the left edge of that scapula, we want to be a little bit more conscious of the value we choose there. Want it to be visible, but not, you know, not super contrasty. I think that's already quite plenty. So we can just try to keep in mind the shape of this area, so just carve it in a little bit if it goes a bit overboard. Just cleaning that out a little bit, and then we can indicate this little plane over here that is part of the shoulder. And we've gone a little too dark. It's obvious when one squints, it's just popping out of there. So let's just brush it over a little bit. We want it to be visible, but not, you know, not something that jumps out to our eye. Perhaps here we can take the opportunity to refine the drawing a little bit as well. Since we do have this lighter plane over there, it's sort of slightly lighter than the big form modeling on there. And it's sort of described also by the darker plane that is in front, so also this plane slightly darker than the big form modeling coming out from the big form modeling, even if it's in a very light area generally. We can put that in and create that contrast with the other plane. Perhaps we can pull it out a little bit. I think that's actually the head of the clavicle that's sort of popping out of there, slightly visible. the acromion process would be somewhere around here. This is the clavicles, lateral head. Just dropping these anatomy nuggets for you guys, so maybe one day stuff sticks. So this is an exception, this lighter plane in this darker sort of form area, so I'm just trying to make it barely visible. I don't want to overplay it at all. This is not, you know, a drawing about bone sticking out of the figure. It's we want to underplay these kinds of things. We want to indicate those, but we don't want to, you know, get too fancy with that. You can also sort of reinforce that a little bit with the outline, perhaps a little bit too much even. Let's just round it out a little bit. I'm giving that part a little bit too much attention, so let's look for more stuff to indicate. Okay, where are the obvious things that are lacking at this point? Well, this area we haven't really described at all. It's just a weird shape currently, for lack of a better description. So let's actually start telling the viewer what's happening over there. And here I'm just starting to describe this little darker area in there, because we do see one happening sort of also. This kind of stuff also happens usually when we have the arm and the torso meeting each other, or any two things. When they meet, stuff tends to go darker between them. All right, just bring that tone a little bit further. It's actually a little bit of shadow that is starting to happen underneath here. So perhaps we can get a slightly bolder outline for this area as well. Realized I didn't really take a good look at this area beforehand, so, or at any point rather. So let's just darken things slightly towards the edge, since it is heading into the shadow territory of things. So as you can see, you know, you can forget stuff, you can sort of go slightly out of the order, but doesn't really matter too much. We can just fix things when we get to those. That's the beauty of graphite. All right, I think that arm is looking a little bit better now. And I guess we have some more things to place here. Just trying to look where to put this little indication of the proximal end of the ulna there, as well as a little indication for the tricep tendon, leaving a bit of a half tone over there. Actually, this area is so unclean in terms of the big form modeling, it's kind of hard to see anything happening here. So let me just real quickly touch things up. We'll have to do this anyway, so might as well give it a go. Okay, just put a little bit more tone back in here in this area, because it's looking a little too contrasty. And now perhaps let's indicate the other side over there. It's actually kind of fine. Actually, if we're getting into very subtle things, we should probably just make a couple of hatches for that plane as opposed to smudging things out with the stump softly, because the thing is we want to kind of achieve some easily legible planes in this stage. We don't really want to smooth things out too much yet. We kind of want to get to a stage where you squint and it looks like it's finished almost. That's kind of the goal. So let me just take a step back and see how we're doing. So probably the lower limbs are some stuff that I don't really enjoy too much. I'm just gonna lighten this stuff a little bit. We don't really want a thick dark line going across the form. It was very distracting. Perhaps this also, this area of the knee is not feeling great, but it's mostly because it's just one line. Perhaps if we begin the modeling slightly over here with another plane, can already maybe start to make a bit more sense. Also, softening things will help definitely later, but already this little extra tone that tells us that it's actually form turning rather than a line did help a little bit. So perhaps on this side as well. A little bit of extra, but yeah, it's rough indication and we're gonna render things out. We're gonna clean things up. It's just how it goes. Also to mention, before this stage, I actually remembered this shadow area. I forgot it entirely with the variation stage. So I just went ahead and darkened it slightly, just hatching in, and gave it a slight gradient or gradation to sort of soften towards there. And as I'm looking at this thing also needs to be a little bit softer. So we'll work on that in the shadow rendering stage, or rendering the darks stage rather. Okay, it's time to move on to the rendering of the lights next, as we know.